So welcome back to Transform Gov, the Digital Government Podcast. We're now in part two, I said, of a fascinating conversation with Brian Rich of Accenture. He's their global leader in AI, particularly within the public sector. So this podcast is brought to you as part of the Ireland e-Government Awards, which will be opening for entry soon. So keep an eye on the podcast so you can find out when. And it's brought to you in association with Accenture. So we explore digital transformation, particularly within the public sector, and how that's going to impact on government services worldwide. So in part one, Brian shared fascinating insights into real-life world impacts of AI within the public sector. And we talked about areas such as backlogs, how they can be dealt with. We talked about talent gaps. We talked about automated agents, which are basically like your executive assistant beside you, helping you do your job within the public sector. So all really, really relevant and practical insights into AI and its deployment within government. But look, that's enough. Go and listen to it. I'll shut up. We're going to get on with it and talk to Brian. So Brian, welcome back for part two of Transform Gov.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
So what do you believe is at stake if public sector doesn't, get on with the deployment and use of AI? Is it even possible to ignore it?
I think it's going to be very difficult to address some of the existential challenges we face without generative AI, right? Climate risk, huge backlogs in government, demographic challenges to workforce, the use of adversarial AI, whether we like it or not. There are people using AI against our institutions and our critical infrastructure. So I think the risk of non-adoption for governments, and I think most executives agree with this, is too high. So I think you're going to start to see, we are already seeing adoption of AI and generative AI across government. I think the trend is really to go from these single important use cases to how do we embed it across our government, because that presents kind of a different challenge when you're thinking about using generative AI at scale. But I would say that most government leaders agree that AI is critical to both industrial security and national security. And so I don't think we're going to see, the risk of non-adoption is too great.
And although you know that, do you think that is known by our important leaders within government?
I believe everybody acknowledges it because it's a fundamental reality of economic competition, not just government services, right? So I think you're seeing AI as not just another technology. It's going to change the way economic competition evolves globally. And I think that I was at Davos 3 weeks ago. I just got back from the Munich Security Conference. I would say most of the government leaders that I interacted with recognize that AI is critical to their resilience as a society because of those existential challenges, because of adversarial AI, because of economic competition.
And with the Davos, did you learn anything new about which direction, I suppose, the public sector is going or governments are going in terms of the use of AI?
So I think there are three patterns that kind of emerged from those discussions. One was kind of getting to scale. Everybody's used AI either personally by using GPT-4, or as a government leader, they may have brought it in as a kind of a use case that they tested. The second is around how to embed AI in across a workforce, because governments employ so many people. I think there's a big focus and sensitivity about, how do we put generative AI in the hands of our substantial workforce. And then third, a big focus, as we mentioned in part one, around trust and governance. And so those three topics were really top of mind, I would say, in Davos. And also, I think critical, infrastructure. People, I don't think, knew what an H100 was, 9 months ago. Everybody on Earth knows that NVIDIA makes H100s, and H100s are critical for GPU and computational workloads for generative AI. So I think, there's a recognition that AI is part of national infrastructure in important ways.
And in terms of, what you think is going to happen coming out of Davos, are there particular things that you can see collaboration happening with?
So I think there are going to be a couple takeaways. One is just the the co-evolutionary relationship between industry and government around some of these challenges. If you think of cybersecurity, that's going to take a whole of government and whole of industry approach to protect our critical infrastructure and our government institutions and our data from, let's say, adversarial AI. The second is that in each, let's say, market, Asia, for example, in Japan, as we mentioned in part one, they're just big demographic challenges. So, governments are looking at the future of their society and thinking about how and where to apply AI to, transform their government services and their workforce so that they're able to address some of the key demographic challenges. Governments are really wanting to make sure that they are resilient and able themselves, right, as a society to have the infrastructure, the talent, the data, the models, to build an AI economy, right, that is going to set them up for success in the future, both in terms of economic security and, as I described, national security.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
Okay, so now from the big kind of lofty ideas, let's get back to some of the nitty-gritty. So in terms of our earlier conversation in part one, you mentioned a couple of things, a lot, which in terms of the ability for AI to be successfully doing what you wanted to do. And data was at the core of that, and I think LLMS as well. So are they big challenges? Are they very big projects? Are they going to take somebody an awfully long time to try and kind of get right?
I think for governments are in a very unique and strong position because they possess data that private industry does not. So governments have, the history of their society is preserved in data that is protected and in the hands of government. And if you think of companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, they don't have access to that data. They can't train their models on that data. And so governments that are in a very unique position to be able to benefit and unlock the value of that data by connecting it to either proprietary or open source models in secure ways, they'll be able to do things that are finally, after years of kind of managing and protecting and governing this data, it's going to be able to deliver value in terms of informing decisions, in terms of process, policy, and services. So I think a lot of government leaders recognize this, what I would call the data advantage that they have. But there's also challenges, right? How do you do it? What are the security protocols? What's the access? How messy is the data? How much money do we spend? What's the ROI of investing in the data hygiene required, right, to gain value from that data? So the good news is I think there's enough urgency on the part of governments that they're working through these I would call priorities very carefully. This isn't a decision that is being made at the IT level or at the data level. Senior executives are very focused on generative AI because they know the future of their agency is going to be, their agencies are already being transformed. And as leaders, their role is to provide, kind of the guidance and prioritization about where and how to apply generative AI.
And are there particular countries that you think are ahead in terms of AI and its deployment within their public sector?
That's a political question. I think every market is dealing with different realities, right? So as I mentioned, in Japan, they've got an age dependency ratio that is driving an urgency around where and how they deploy AI.
So their aging population, is that what you mean?
Yeah, and so they've got an aging population, and so they're using AI to solve for government services that are going to be hard to staff, right, over the next 10 years as people retire and age out of the workforce. In the Middle East, they've got a huge dependency on foreign workers, right? So it's very expensive for them to import, labor from a foreign country, put them in a government job. If they quit or get hired by industry, they have to replace them. It's extremely expensive. So they see generative AI as potentially reducing their dependency on that very expensive pillar within their government workforce. In North America, state and local agencies are 30% understaffed. They just can't find the people because our unemployment rate is low enough that it's very difficult to attract the kind of talent you need into government service. And so generative AI is an opportunity to kind of close that gap, given the employment dynamics in North America. So to answer your question, I think each market is prioritizing based on the specific challenges they face as a government. I think within that, we talked about the three categories, citizen services, workforce, and IT transformation. Everybody views, generative AI as a very constructive contribution to improving how governments operate. But as I mentioned before, trust, governance, policies are critical to doing it safely and in a way that is going to, enable at-scale delivery.
Are there particular areas within the public sector that you think AI could make a really large transformative impact that are just not being explored that you think should be?
I think it's going to be a co-evolutionary process where governments start to use it in certain places. It builds trust, and then they say, okay, let's use it. I think you're going to see kind of this patchwork of where and how governments are applying AI. And I think I don't see areas that are being ignored, because I think government leaders are using their resources to prioritize where and how they apply generative AI. I was talking with a prime minister of a European country, and the use case they threw out as their burning issue is that they've got the highest number of traffic fatalities of any country in Europe. And so, that was the use case that they had identified, as being really important to them. And, I built a series of agents that showed them how they could start to use the information at their disposal to make interventions in their transportation grid to significantly reduce fatalities, right? And so I think those are kind of really exciting, human applications of generative AI. And what I think you're starting to see is government leaders are trying to connect the technology with that human impact, right?
Yes.
And so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I just think you're going to find that every country has its own unique set of problems that they can't hire their way out of. And they're starting to think about, well, maybe I can use generative AI to help, improve or solve that problem.
It's not that different to the startup world where you're trying to find the biggest pain points, right? So it sounds like governments deploy AI where their biggest pain point is, our public sector. But then on another level, there seems to be a movement towards, well, how do we kind of do it on a much bigger and broader application across government? So you've got, okay, we start with a big point, but we solve it, we get confidence, we get trust, and then we're trying to look at deploying it at a much larger scale across the public sector. Is that what you're seeing happening as a kind of a pattern?
Yeah, I think looking for those scaled applications is where leaders are now focused, because they're putting together, they're thinking broader about how generative AI could transform government services, government workplace, and enterprise transformation. And I think they're starting to place what we're going to call bigger bets, right? That are going to have bigger outcomes, informed by the trust that has been built by using it incrementally in different places within their organization.
Okay. And what about, let's say, you're talking to a government agency or part of the public sector who haven't really adopted AI to any great extent. Maybe they've done a small pilot. Are there particular, frameworks, advice, approaches that you would, recommend?
Yeah, so we have kind of a framework of 5, what we call strategic imperatives. And the first one is leadership, that this isn't like everything else, right? That generative AI has to be an executive level focus. And in some cases, we ask a government leader, where and how are you deploying generative AI right now? If they don't know the answer, they've got a leadership problem, right? Every government leader needs to know where and how they're using AI and generative AI, in their agency or across their government. And that leadership sets the tone, right? It's not just, you need to show business leadership or executive leadership. Leadership has to set the tone for how and where generative AI is going to make a difference. And that gets to kind of the second category, which is your data. Governments have massive amounts of data, and they've been wrestling with, data transformation for decades, data mesh, data fabric, data lakes, right? There's been a whole journey around data. It's important that the government start to think about turning those disparate siloed data sets into a marketplace that different stakeholders within the government can now start to unlock the value of that through generative AI. So that whole data modernization has to be a continued area of focus. The third is your workforce. From our estimation, you need to invest in much in your people as you do technology, whether that's training, upskilling, but also making them part of the transformation, including them in the process of deciding where and how you're going to apply generative AI. Because if you're going to put tools and applications in the hands of your workforce, they're the stakeholders that are going to make that transformation successful. So enlisting them as a constituency in that process is important. Third is, trust and governance, what we're calling responsible AI. You have to think about this up front. You have to think about what policies. We talked about this in the first part of the program. You need policies around the data, around the computational workloads, and around the AI models. These are not things that you think about after the fact. They have to be front and center to your, the framework in terms of how you're going to apply generative AI. And then lastly, what we call continuous adoption. Generative AI is going to be embedded in everything. It's going to be embedded in the digital platforms that we may be using already, ServiceNow, Salesforce, SAP. You're going to see vertical applications emerge to solve specific problems. Governments have to be very intelligent about how they set themselves up for success without getting into technical debt in terms of looking for short-term gains, right, to prove that it's working and making a difference versus, at-scale transformation where they're continuously able to adopt and adapt to the pace of innovation that's emerging in the private sector. So those are our kind of 5 strategic imperatives, and they proved very prescient. We evolved those imperatives almost 2 years ago, and they're becoming even more true as the generative AI wave increases.
And you talked earlier on, actually in part 1, about one of the very exciting areas that AI can transform is around actual IT development. And tell me about that. What do you see happening?
So a lot of governments have been, they have limited budgets, a lot of things to do. And so, different governments make trade-offs continuously about, are they going to invest in their data or their technology? Are they going to invest in their people or their data? And so IT transformation is often one of the things that governments put off. They may have a digital platform that they stood up 15 years ago, and they realize to unlock the value of GenAI, they need to modernize the platforms that they're using. And we're seeing a pretty significant adoption around automating the migration from legacy systems of data, business rules, and code from a legacy system to a new system. In one government in Europe, for example, we accelerated 5 times using generative AI, the speed it took them to migrate from one system to another system, right? Something that they thought would take 15 months, we did it in 3 months. And so, that's a pretty massive nonlinear gain in both time and cost savings, right? So, what this means is that it's going to become faster, cheaper, and more efficient to use generative AI for some aspects of IT transformation.
Well, look, Brian, we're getting close to the end. Not the end yet. People don't go away. But I think it would be really remiss of me not to talk to you about what you see as I suppose, the future of AI within public sector, and obviously things that excite you in terms of their potential. What do you see coming down the track, maybe in the next 5 years?
Wow, 5 years.
Seems like a long time, doesn't it? Maybe I should go shorter, 2 years.
I think what we're going to see is the digital transformation of the workplace, just like we saw the digital transformation of the telephone, right? I mean, it sounds crazy, but I grew up using a landline. I think you're going to see similar transformations in how people perform their jobs.
So they won't be standing by the fax machine waiting for the fax to come through. Do you remember those times?
I thought the fax was like the most incredible invention on earth when I was 12 years old. So I think you're going to just see this real transformation in the workplace. And I think you're going to see workers empowered by access to tools, applications, and data that traditionally have been they've had to work in large teams or go to an IT and a data scientist and a geospatial expert. And, something that was a big collaboration that took months is something that they're going to be able to, accomplish in a matter of minutes. I mean, I'm seeing that that's true already in certain use cases, especially in defense, where they have massive volumes of data and they don't have enough people to unlock the value of that data. We've built, agents that are able to detect anomalies in massive amounts of data in seconds, right? That previously took, 3 people writing algorithms, over the course of weeks. So I think you're going to see a real transformation in the workforce. I think you're going to see, in terms of our daily lives, ideally, it doesn't become a noisy, weird internet type situation, but that you're going to see companies develop generative AI applications that are available to us on our phones and our computers that will act as assistants that we're going to be able to use to accomplish tasks that currently are very complicated, applying for a passport, submitting your taxes, applying for loans. I think you're going to see kind of an empowerment of the individual, using AI and generative AI tools. I think you're going to see incredible advances in science, drug discovery, material science. I mean, it's already starting to happen, right? The way that generative AI is accelerating what scientists are able to do with information, simulations, testing, and evaluation of things that traditionally just took months or years that are able to accomplish in significantly less time. So I think the pace of innovation is going to increase.
Wow, I'm looking forward to all of that. Is there more that you want to say before we sign off? Because I think even small things like, doing your tax returns that I mentioned, obviously it's on my mind, but also talking about pharma and all of the research that can be accelerated. Anything else that you see coming down the track? I
mean, I think I don't want to, those are the good things. I think we also have to be realistic about, some of the bad things, right? And, from cybersecurity to biowarfare to all sorts of weird stuff that bad actors can do with generative AI. There's going to have to be a real culture and education around, generative AI. So society as a whole, right, is informed and educated around generative AI. I think that's going to become part of the evolution.
It certainly was a lot of catching up to be done, and I think that it's caught us all by surprise how fast everything's changed based on AI. But look, that's part of the challenge. But look, Brian, thank you so much for joining us for part 2. And everybody, please listen to part 1. They're both fantastic in their own way. So it's really a goodbye to Brian for now, anyway. And hopefully we might have you back for some other subject rather. But in the meantime, I just want to thank the team here. So thank you to our studio manager, Peter Rice. Thank you to the video editor, Neil Horner. Thank you to sound engineer and videographer, Lee Brennan. And finally, thank you to South Dublin Podcast Studio.